What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move with excellence. Before I get into this topic, just a quick point of clarification. BLD stands for bald, not blonde, when you're getting booked into the Miami County Dade Jail. And I know this, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I did a video yesterday, last night, kind of late too, about Wes Watson getting arrested. Right? Not a guy that I talk a lot about, but I figured why not? And the video ran surprisingly good numbers, right? So thank you to everybody that checked it out. But I showed a screenshot of his booking information. And I didn't just kind of breeze through it. I stopped, got out the car, flagged people down. Hey, look at this over here. And was super confident and sarcastic and just talking shit. And I was wrong. I was wrong because it said that he was bald. It did not say that he was blonde. And yeah, so thank you to those in the comment section for pointing that out. It is a mistake that I made once, and I will never make again, courtesy of you guys. You can tell how some of you guys feel about me, though, based on how you worded your comments. Because some people were like, hey, I don't know, man, maybe that stands for bald instead of blonde, or hey, homie, love your content, bro, respect what you do. Just a heads up, out here in Florida, that actually means bald, not blonde. But keep doing you, bro. While on the flip side, you had, oh, this dude's an idiot. This is why nobody should listen to you. Man, you're hella dumb. Where'd you get your law license? Don't ever talk about Florida. It's cool. I take it all. I accept it all. Right. And yeah, I'll do better. So thank you. Now for this subject, a little more of a serious topic. PBS did a documentary recently, and it's up on YouTube. I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. I strongly suggest that you guys check it out. If you have any interest in the notorious Pelican Bay State Prison or the SHU program, the hunger strikes, how those brought about, changes to long-term solitary confinement in the California Department of Corrections. I'm normally pretty critical of news content and other sort of mainstream media content about prisons in California, especially ones that I've been to, because they always seem to miss something, right? And this was incredibly well done by PBS. I think part of it is the guys they had speaking from their experience. So I had a handful of guys who had done 10, 20, 30 plus years in the SHU program, infinitely longer than I did. And these guys spoke with transparency. They were vulnerable. They they shared about how they felt, right? They shared from their experience. And I can identify with and relate to a lot of what they're saying, to a degree. And not the stereotypical kind of chest thumping and macho rah rah stuff. No, these dudes were real. These dudes were real, and so I appreciate them for being that open, and and for giving the viewer just a glimpse into what that experience was like. And the fact that PBS filmed it in Pelican Bay, the images really kind of got me. It brought me back to that place in a sense. Even the waves, they show the waves crashing against the coast, and you see that when you're on the bus up there to the bay. And it's really crazy, that drive, unlike any other trip to any other prison, that I went to, they're definitely not what the drive to Corcoran looked like, right? But you're seeing some of the most beautiful scenery that the state has to offer. You're driving through forests, fucking huge trees, just green and mountains. And as somebody from a very urban area, you see that stuff. And it was gorgeous. And yet it's on the way to California, putting you in the most isolated, desolate place that they have built for you. So it was a trip, and like I said, it was filmed in Pelican Bay. Some stuff was recreated, and you can tell, like the guy when he's sitting in the cell and he's rolling up his mattress. I was like, that's not what the mattress is. But like, uh, but that was the cell, right? That was the cell. Those were the jumpsuits, and that was the yard, and so they just did a great job. They did a really good job capturing a lot of that stuff. Uh, some of the people I know a couple of the people that were featured in it. Michael Saavedra, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But we crossed paths later. Dolores Canales is central to the whole documentary, right? Her and her now husband Jack Morris, who was up in the Bay for decades upon decades. and is now released. I don't think the hunger strikes and the movement wins without Dolores. And I'm sure she would not say that. She would deflect that, and no, man, it's on the guys. It's on the folks that were starving themselves in those cells, and that's true, right? Ultimately, that's true. But you see the documentary, and I was watching that from the streets, and I've been fortunate to be around Dolores, yeah, a whole bunch of times, right, in different spaces and for different reasons. Powerful woman, right? Very unassuming, but man, she could move mountains. And you've seen the first hunger strike where they were back to the negotiation table afterwards, and CDCR wasn't coming through as expected, and things had kind of stalled, and there was some hesitancy. But then the public got behind it, and ultimately there wound up being like 30,000 guys locked up at prisons up and down the state who participated for a period of time. But the movement in the streets, the rallies, the protests, the making noise, I got to see some of that. I moved to Florida in 2011, but I was back by 2012, and so I got to be around some of that and see it. And that's Dolores, man. That was everybody, but she was the engine of the public becoming aware of this, because she would not let you ignore it. She would not let you remain ignorant, and she really wouldn't let you sit on the sideline. And so she was able to build teams and get information out. And her name has come up. Her son was in the Bay back then, and he's still incarcerated. And that's a whole separate topic that I have no interest in, right? I don't know him. I never been around him, but I've been around her, and she was a beast, man, in in the most blessed of ways. And so I'm glad that she's featured in it. Again, I don't think it's possible to overstate the value of that. And you see, Azadeh was there. She was the head of Underground Scholars when I was there at Berkeley. So shout out to her. She was with All of Us or None and working with the lawyers. So the documentary kind of covers how we get there, right? And it's a trip to see in the beginning. It wasn't new information. Like I knew this stuff already, but to see it, the old archived video footage, and to hear these individuals rather than just read about it, but to actually hear them talk about the creation of Pelican Bay. And when I talk about the Bay, I'm talking about the SHU program. They have a yard also, and that yard has its own history. Uh, but I mean the SHU, and that's what most people are talking about when they talk about the Bay. Hearing them talk about the need for it, and it's for the worst of the worst. And man, I heard that phrase so many damn times in prison, and after prison, but in particular in prison. You heard it before you went to the Bay, right? Oh, that's where the worst of the worst go. You're gonna keep acting this way, we're gonna put you with the worst of the worst. Oh, you think you're bad, you're going with the worst of the worst. And of course you brush it off because you're in there, right? It is what it is. I remember there was this propaganda piece. That's what I called it. It was covered as like a news segment. It was presented as a news segment. They had a little Sacramento area, I think, reporter doing it, and they talked to. It was put on by the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, and it was like a campaign propaganda piece, And they talked to some female CO that got beat up and all this other stuff, and that would run on the local news station in the Bay, like every weekend, multiple times sometimes. And so for like a year, the worst of the worst, the worst of the worst. The documentary has the numbers at 3,000, from what I remember, and 3,000 of the worst of the worst. Look, not everybody that was validated as a prison gang member or associate, first of all, was a prison gang member or associate, but also it's not the worst of the worst. Yes, your leadership was in the Bay, right? The leaders of every, GP at least, prison gang and disruptor, all that, they were in the Bay. There ain't 3,000 of them, right? Now that everybody's out, or most people are out, there's not 3,000 people walking around on yards in the California Department of Corrections with the power of life and death in their hand, in terms of these different groups and organizations. There never has been, right? The numbers radically inflated. It was so easy to get validated. It's a trip seeing Brian Perry in there, because I'm about 99% sure that my paperwork from when I was fighting my validation centered around stuff from Brian Perry. I think he was working for CDCR still back then, and where he talks about how easy it is to validate people, and how he traveled around to other states and was like, "Hey, people are really surprised that we keep people in solitary confinement as long as we do in California." And how it caused him to rethink it. This was all by design, and you will never convince me that the SHU program was not torture. That doesn't mean that it broke everybody. That that just means it was torture. It really was, right? By any international definition, um, that certainly counts. And it was all intentional. And again, it wasn't necessary. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. We got to put all these guys in the bay. We got to put all these guys in the SHU because they're all the shot callers. But then at the same time say, well, all these guys that run the prison system are still in the bay. But you can't have it both ways. So you remove us from the yard, right? Because supposedly we're all so dangerous. But yet us being in the SHU doesn't stop supposedly the folks from calling shots from these cells, 7 miles or whatever it is from the Oregon border up and down the state of California. So obviously it's not working, right? Obviously it's not working. But anyways, it brought up a lot for that, and to kind of hear that, to see the guys sitting across the table, negotiating to a degree with the undersecretary of CDCR at the time, and he comes across like a dick, right? And it sounds like he did back then, and it looked like he still did in the documentary. Hey man, hopefully I was helpful, and kind of goes off to do his thing. You weren't helpful, Holmes. You weren't helpful at all. And he's talking to these guys and saying, hey, I'm not going to negotiate on on the barrel of a gun, so to speak, because of the hunger strike. They never wanted to negotiate. It There was a lot of lawsuits. There was a lot of legal work by some bona fide jailhouse attorneys, and then by some guys like myself and others who was just writing 602s, getting an order to show cause, and pushing our habeas petition as far as we could. And there was so many arguments made, and these were good, solid arguments. And the courts were listening. They just CDCR stayed one step ahead. I beat my validation a few times while I was up there. I never got out of the SHU. I was still paroled from there because I'd beat it. And then they'd say, okay, well, you're under investigation to be revalidated, so we're just going to leave you here, and turn around in a month, give me a new 1030, a new confidential information, a new this, and then I have to start the whole process over again with 602s, which are administrative appeals on the prison level. And that shit all takes time. And so I would climb up the ladder, they'd knock me down, I'd start over with the same arguments, they'd knock me down. And thankfully, by the grace of God, I had a release date. I was paroling. So at some point I got so close to, like, I'm leaving now. I don't even have time to keep fighting this. But it's not as if these points and these arguments and these things weren't being made long before the hunger strike. Right? Like, so I paroled in December of 2005. And so it's disingenuous to, like, oh, well, now that you're being extreme, pull back a little bit. Pelican Bay was the home of extreme in the California Department of Corrections. So that was a trip, right? And the hunger strikes. I don't want to make this video too long, so I'll kind of wrap it up with this. The hunger strikes and the end of hostilities. There's a lot of talk now on YouTube, in particular, but also just politicians and stuff. And you let all these guys out of the SHU, and look how violent these yards are. And these guys, just the gangs, the gangs pulled one over on the public, and they got out so that they could run amok and continue on with their criminal enterprises. And, folks are getting indicted. They're fighting their cases. That is what it is. But that's a small number of people compared to those that were housed back there. You got dudes that would have never come home if they would have stayed in the SHU program. But the fact that they were able to get out of the SHU because of all these sacrifices, then they got release dates. And they're out here thriving. They're out here doing amazing things in their community. They're present with their families. That would have never happened without the end of hostilities. The end of hostilities and the hunger strikes run hand in hand, right? You don't have one without the other. So, yes, we could say all these guys got out and then some of them are running amok, and it's kind of changed the landscape of prison. And there is that conversation, and I'm okay with that conversation. But that's not the only conversation. I think what gets missed and what this documentary is a reminder of is all of the people whose lives were positively changed by this united effort, right? By everybody coming together and saying, hey, at this point in time, we have a common obstacle, and it is not one another. It is not other dudes in boxers and jumpsuits, man. And the power that they had, it talks about everybody in the streets, and like I said, the protests and the rallies, and you see Berkeley was a hotbed area of that. I've been to the Capitol more times than I could count, and networks and relationships in the streets between organizations were built around the hunger strikes that exist to this day. That there's still, an annual day. I forget what it's called off the top of my head, but uh, one day a year in particular, where folks come from all over the state, especially a lot of formerly incarcerated people, and push for legislative changes at Sacramento. And we go around in little small groups, right? And we meet with representatives of our area and representatives of other areas. And it's all very organized. And we got talking points, and there's a rally, and there's food, and there's music, and it's a celebration of life. It's a celebration of freedom by people who know intimately well what it's like to lose that. But it is also a celebration of, not so much celebration, but a testament of the work that remains to be done. And so folks fuel each other, and they motivate each other, and it's a beautiful sight to see. It's humbling to be a part of, just a big, a small fish in a big pond, man, of just powerful folks doing things. And to think a lot of us used to just be withering away in a cell, and we're the worst of the worst and the most dangerous. And God forbid you let these people out. They're going to wreak havoc. Some people do wreak havoc, right? It's prison, you know, but the vast majority, no, they don't. They don't. And the proof is in the numbers. The proof is in the pudding, so to speak. And it gets overshadowed and it gets ignored by this group getting indicted or that group getting indicted. And again, I'm open to those conversations. I have those conversations on my channel sometimes, and I point some of that stuff out. But there is another side to that, and this is the side that this documentary gave attention to uh, that not a lot of us do, and I'm guilty of that also, and I'm looking to do better moving forward. Michael Saavedra was a very he was out there, right? He was out there in the folks, that have been incarcerated and participating in higher education. That's the context I met him in. I don't know him from Pelican Bay. Apparently, he also went to Corcoran. He was in Corcoran for the second hunger strikes. But again, that's all many years after after I was there. But I seen him in the streets, humble dude, again, passionate and motivated and powerful. And so respects to him being in there. I'll end it on this note. He makes reference to his neighbor who had passed away during the hunger strikes. And, my take on it is that's the one guy who can say that he died in the SHU program. One guy, to the best of my knowledge, who can say he died in the SHU program fighting against solitary confinement. The SHU killed a lot of people. You know, uh, People took their lives up there. People went crazy up there. Um, it was a harmful environment. It wasn't dangerous insofar as you're going out to the yard. There's 1,000 guys out there, and you don't know if some of them got knives and want to stab you. No, it wasn't dangerous in that way. There was eras, right, of tier fights and guys fighting on a tier and SEALs just shooting at them. So you had that, a version of the Corcoran gladiator fights. So I don't want to dismiss that or undermine it. And cell fights, people lost their lives in cells at the hands to their cellies. So people died in the SHU various ways. This dude starved himself to death, and CDC wrote it up as a suicide. I think it's the opposite of a suicide, right? Suicide is somebody giving up. I gotta be careful when I say that word. That generally is somebody giving up, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. I have people, in my friend circle and in my family that have, taken the route of a permanent solution to a temporary problem. He was active, and I don't mean that in gangster. That was an act of defiance. right? That those guys did, and CDCR and the politicians who support them are always trying to undermine everything. And the saboteurs, right? There's inmate saboteurs too. Don't get it twisted. That have been anti hostilities, anti folks getting out of the SHU, and they testified in front of Congress and did all that shit also, right? Just don't put them up on documentaries. But they did that too. And how these guys aren't really hunger striking. They were saving food. Nah, okay, there was 30,000 maybe for one day, but then the next day a bunch of guys fell off and they weren't hunger striking. They're looking for ways to minimize. They're looking for ways to take away the glory that is earned by, for the most part, nameless and faceless dudes sitting in prison cells in their underwear, struggling, right? Believing that, hey, maybe this will lead to something. As one of the guys said in the documentary, we're dying anyway. I'm dying anyway. So why not continue with the hunger strike? I'm going to die sitting here with a full belly and rot away in this cell, or I'm going to die doing something to try to make this better, to try to make this different. And they did. They did. And you can say what you want about how CDC runs now, and I'm not suggesting that it's running very fucking well. Okay. But there's generations of people who aren't getting validated and thrown in the box now because of the sacrifices that these guys made. And most of us will never know who most of them were. But salute to you if you participated in the hunger strikes. Salute to you if you were out here in the streets and passing out flyers and protesting and yelling and engaging, and people's families got involved. It's a moment, man. It is a moment in civil rights history that I think we're too close to right now to really appreciate for the significance that it was. And all this rah rah, a lot of this rah rah about California and the California model and this and that, which again, I'm not saying is running well. Don't get me wrong. But all this trying to dismiss this and Prop 36 and these different laws to roll back things. Don't get it twisted. That's a pushback against what those men did, right? That is the system responding to getting beat. Uh, and look who they got beat by, right? So, anyways, I'm gonna end it there. I can keep going on this, but let me know if you guys want me to unpack other elements of maybe my experiences in there or what my thoughts are. But excellent documentary. I can't recommend it highly enough. If you watch it, tap in with a comment, shoot me a DM, shoot me an email, Joshua@thehomiehangout.com. Let me know what you think of it. All right, you guys, take care.